Hi, everybody. We're excited to welcome Dr. Nicole Biamonte, who's going to talk to us about preparing for a job in academia. So, Nicole, just tell us what are schools looking for in their candidates, and tell us where you teach and what you teach, first of all.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Hi, Jenny. And thanks for inviting me to do this. I'm glad to be able to share what I know. I teach at McGill. I've been there, wow, this is my 10th year at McGill that I'm just finishing up. That I was on the interview list to check off a gender box. But it turned out that was not true. It turned out they were really looking for someone who does what I do, which is popular music. This started as a secondary area. My dissertation is on Beethoven and Brahms, but I wanted to write it on the Canadian rock band Rush. And my advisor said, no one will hire you. So I said, okay, I like Beethoven and Brahms too. And I wrote about them. And it's kind of ironic that my long-term job actually did hire me because of my writing on popular music and not because of Beethoven and Brahms. But that just shows that the field is changing. So I think in terms of disciplines, that varies. Just work on what you're interested in and do what you want to do. In terms of what schools are looking for, I think the number one thing they're looking for is someone who's going to be a good colleague. And there are lots and lots of variables to that. So if you're at a school that's a research-oriented school, they're going to be looking for someone with a very developed research profile with some journal articles out there and a book chapter, or maybe even a book. That'll be for down the road, I think, for you who are listening to this video. But definitely a strong research profile, and a very good idea to have one main area and then one secondary area that's not exactly the same thing. So that gives you some breadth as well as some depth. If you are at a school with MA programs, probably they're looking more for a balance of emphasis on research and teaching. In terms of research, you wouldn't need to be so much of a specialist. They would be looking for someone who has kind of a breadth of expertise and knows a little bit about a lot of different areas of the discipline. And I think for schools that are primarily undergraduate schools, teaching is the most important thing. So that's the thing to foreground. But I think there are also the other intangible factors into what makes a good colleague. So one is just this sort of personal component. Do you seem like you're going to be someone that everyone's going to enjoy working with for 10 or 20 years? So definitely put on your friendliest face. And do you seem like someone who's going to do their fair share of service? So I think if you get to the stage of an interview, it would be good to ask about what are the expectations there. And they're also looking for somebody that won't leave right away. So as much as you can, they're looking for somebody who seems like they see themselves having settled into this job. So in your interview, I think should you get an interview, it's a good strategy to think about what would it look like if I took this job 5 years down the road? Think about that, and then frame your questions really from that perspective.
Great.
So the answer is teaching, research, and service, and friendliness. But the balance of those, I think, changes depending on where you're looking.
Absolutely, absolutely. So most of my students, and I'm sure a lot of people watching this video, are current master's students or maybe a couple of doctorates, but some undergrads too. So what should they be working on in school? Let's just take those master's students. What should they be working on in school to be successful in the field?
I would say you can always work on your teaching, which you can do by taking a pedagogy course or reading about it. Definitely, if anyone offers you opportunities to guest teach a section or fill in for someone, you should take them whenever you can, get the opportunity to practice teaching and get as much feedback on your teaching as you can. If you're a TA and your supervisor hasn't already come and watched you teach, then you should ask them to and ask them for specific feedback. But you can also get kind of more passive practice just by watching other people teach. So when you watch your own professors, I would say your main focus there should be whatever content they're trying to teach. But secondary area of focus should be, how are they teaching it? What are they doing? When I first got to McGill, we were given French classes for a couple of years. And that was really helpful for me, just to get examples of other pedagogies in another discipline. And I actually got some really useful ideas from some of the language learning activities that we did. to translate to music learning activities. So I would say whatever you can do to hone your teaching is good. And the best thing is practice, but studying and watching other people helps as well.
Mhm.
In terms of classroom demonstration, there are probably more workarounds than there ever have been before with the ability to play recordings and use technology, but still really useful to have some basic keyboard skills. And in terms of these kinds of keyboard skills, they're not really, learning to play Beethoven sonatas so much as they are being able to play cadential progressions, being able to realize a figured bass line, the kinds of theory playing, the kinds of keyboard playing you would do in a theory class. Commensurate with that, it's also important to have good musicianship. There are online programs that can help with that, as well as classes, in-person classes. And finally, I think the very useful skill for navigating grad school and for the field is just to learn how to read strategically and to think critically about what you're reading. So the default approach might seem like when you're assigned a reading to read it through from start to finish, and that's usually not the best thing to do. Usually the best thing to do is to read the abstract or maybe the first paragraph and the last paragraph to get a sense of the article, and then maybe read in a more detailed way. If you're assigned to read a book, you might also want to consider reading some book reviews of it, just to see what other scholars think are the particular issues involved. So I suppose I'm really saying, once again, these are research and teaching skills, but we can break them down into a little bit more individual components.
And things that they can be working on while they're in school. That's great. So how important is it to publish and present before you go on the job market?
I think it's good to do one or two things just to show that you're thinking of yourself as a professional adult who's contributing to the field. But I think the relative importance of that, again, depends on the position. That'll be more important at a research-focused school. That'll be less important at a teaching-focused school. But actually, the very first job that I got beyond my graduate institution was a visiting position at Skidmore College. It was a small liberal arts school. And I thought that was the kind of scholar I was going to be, because my dissertation was sort of half theory and half musicology, and I studied some choral conducting while I was there, and I trained as a pianist. So I thought, I'm a generalist. I am perfect for a school like this because I do a bunch of these different things. So they hired me, and they hired someone else also for a second visiting position who was actually a friend of mine from grad school. And then when it came down to choosing between the two of us for the tenure track one, you can only go by what people said, and really they're not supposed to say. But if anyone on the search committee is a friend of yours, you'll probably hear something. And so they said, yeah, he had an article and you didn't, and that was the big deal. So it turned out, even at a school like that, I guess to not, or maybe our teaching was equal, maybe, I don't know, but it actually did come down to the fact that he had an article. So that was my kick in the pants to really do a lot of research. And now I have, because of that, pretty much because I didn't get that job, I ended up at a research one school. I'm not really sorry now, but I can't really complain. I get to teach popular music. It's great. But at the same time, I kind of miss doing all those other things. So it's definitely important to do it. Presentations, I think, even though publications have more prestige, presentations are really important because it's a great opportunity to get feedback in real time from colleagues before publication. This is really an excellent chance to bounce your ideas off of other people. So when you present a paper, everyone's afraid of the question period because it represents the unknown, and who knows what they're going to ask you, right? So well, one thing you can always do is plant a question in the back with a friend of yours, and then you'll have at least one that you're already ready to answer. But I would say bring a pencil, because some of the things that you'll get will not be questions as much as comments. And sometimes that's just grandstanding when someone's, not so much of a question as a comment, and now I'll talk about my own tangentially related work just for the sake of talking and making you listen to my voice. But I think sometimes you can get really helpful suggestions for sources that you didn't know about, or musical examples, or maybe a shift of approach. So all this to say, when you give a paper, have a pencil during the question period so you can take notes. Publishing, I think, is, if you can get one or two things out there before you finish your degree, that will definitely make you more competitive on the job market. Increasingly in this tight market, I think places not only want to see that you've finished your dissertation, but you've gone beyond that and done something else already. It also allows you just to share your research more globally, so that you become part of this very slow scholarly dialogue that takes place across these scattered journals and books and essay collections. At, again, kind of this sort of very, very glacial time scale. But nevertheless, you become part of that dialogue. And, 5 or 10 years down the road, people will cite your work and comment on your work. And so it's, like I said, it's important. That's what it really means, I think, to be a scholar, is to be part of that back and forth.
Absolutely. And I want the students watching this video, one of the questions is how do I go about finding that research area? I mean, this is from undergrads too. So tell us about how you found your research area.
Yeah, well, so it's a tricky thing to find the research area. And I think not everybody realizes that this requires research to find the research area, as well as lots more research once you do find it. So I think a good way to do it is think about what you like. Think about something you're interested in, maybe music that you love, or maybe if you're particularly interested in a parameter like chromaticism or rhythm, I would say start there and then just do some reading up on it. And if you read general overview kinds of articles, very often they will have, here's what's going on in the current research. And then at the end of that, they'll have, here are the directions we need to go from here. And there's hardly anything on this. And keep an eye out for any kind of signposts like that, like, oh, there isn't very much research on this topic, because that is a place where you can really have an impact. You can be a pioneer, really. So that's nice, because it also means you don't have to first read what everyone else said if there's nothing that anyone has said so far. For my own topic, I actually first asked my advisor, and my advisor said, I have an idea for something that's an interesting topic that I've never followed up on, which is the musical characteristics of the pastorale, which is this very old literary tradition that dates back to, I don't know, Virgil, the ancient times. And we have these ideas that it's in a major key and it's in, a compound meter and has flutes and oboes, but he thought there would be some more music structural things beyond that. And that's probably true, but it just didn't seem very interesting to me. I'm frankly not excited by pastorales. And I was thinking, yeah, if there are interesting structural things for me, I think they're going to be like, yeah, the harmony and the tonality are not very exciting here, and the rhythm is not very syncopated. I guess to me, it felt like I was sort of looking for an absence of things that I personally thought were interesting. So I did, in fact, go to the New Grove Dictionary of Music and Musicians, which back then was 20 volumes on the library shelf. And yeah, do you remember this?
I do.
Back to Bolivia. Yeah, so but I Xeroxed the article on pastorales and dutifully carried it around in my briefcase for a couple of weeks. And I think I read the first few paragraphs, but I just wasn't really interested in it. So I kind of took a page from one of the things I was interested in rock music, which were all of these kind of modal scales and harmonies that show up in the late 1960s in rock, which I think sort of bled through from the folk revival, because a lot of the songs in the folk revival are really quite old, 17th and even maybe 16th century tunes that are mostly modal. So I was really interested in these modal structures, but I decided, since there was no one at my institution that had anything to do with popular music and I was being discouraged from working on it, that I would look at them in 19th century music instead, because there were people who knew about 19th century music. So I ended up working on mode in Beethoven, Brahms, and Schumann. And that, to me, I think was good, because it gave me this base of canonical, very traditional sounding research to build on. But eventually, when I did start working on popular music, it was a good jumping off point. So again, I would say find that spark of the thing that you're interested in, the music that you like, or the parameter that you're interested in, and go from there.
Great. And so leading into that, how important is it to find a mentor, both on your campus and maybe outside of your campus circle?
Yeah, definitely. And it's easier to go beyond your campus than ever before. So that's something that's really, that technology has really, I think, made the scholarly network a lot stronger than it used to be. Back in the day, it would have been really hard for us to do an interview like that.
Right.
So I think absolutely you need a mentor on your campus, and maybe more than one mentor. You might want like maybe separate mentors for research, because senior scholars, I think, have a better sense of the long range trajectory of the field, and just have a lot more experience writing proposals and writing articles, and dealing with the inevitable rejections of those, because
Mhm.
we all get rejected. That's sort of the hard thing about being an academic. In a way, it can feel like you're always a student because you're always being evaluated. So you send out a conference proposal and they say yes or no, or you send out an article submission and they say yes or no or revise. At least there's that in between one. And same thing with grant applications and job applications. And the level of feedback that you get for an article submission is usually high, but the rest of these, it's kind of hit or miss, as to, you may never hear what was wrong with your grant application or job application, or even your paper proposal. Um, so I think you should have a research mentor who knows something about your area and is the most senior person you can find. And maybe that's somebody not at your institution. Mine was Walter Everett at the University of Michigan, and I met him by going to the Society of Music Theory conferences and going to the pop music interest group. And so we just got to know one another there. And you should have a teaching mentor probably at your institution, someone who works on pedagogy, perhaps the person I'm talking to now, who knows the latest research. But I will say that in terms of job market advice, junior people are better. That those senior people that have been in that job for 30 years, they're not going to have the best advice about how to negotiate the interview process, because it's been a really long time for them and things have changed a lot. So for thinking about your next steps going forward professionally, I would say talk to someone who has done it more recently, is my
Okay.
advice there.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much for answering these questions. Is there anything you want to add to these new scholars interested in our field?
And the last, yeah, the thing that I tell my students is actually the most important thing that you can learn is how to manage your time. That's the important skill that trumps all of the other skills.
Yes.
So yeah, any interesting articles that you see on time management strategies? For some people, it works to keep a schedule or a log or something like that. Some people use reminders on their phone to organize, but some kind of tool like that, where you have a way of keeping track of the short-term deadlines and the long-term deadlines, I think is going to be the most helpful thing for you down the road.
It's
So
still helpful for me now. I live by deadlines.
yes, me too, me too.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much for talking with us,
Sure,
Nicole.
sure. It's my pleasure. It's great to see you. And so good luck, everyone.